All right, good morning. Welcome to Friday Morning Fuel. I am your host, Coach Mary. Thank you for joining. We're on live the first Friday of every month, and this month we're going to talk about brining. I know as we're starting to roll into turkey season, or just when you're looking to switch things up for how you prepare a lot of your proteins, and especially your really lean proteins that are less in fat. Brining is an excellent technique that we can use to give them more flavor and moisture. So we've got a couple of things happening here, and I'm going to walk you through what we are preparing today. So step one is I am heating up my cast iron skillet. I actually brined 2 pork chops last night in a garlic rosemary brine, which we are going to make today. But we're also going to cook our pork chops so you can kind of see how quickly and easily this comes together. So this is heating up. We're going to start with throwing these into the pan first. So last night I made my brine. Brining, it's pretty simple, and you guys will see we pretty much throw all of our ingredients into one pot, just warm it up to dissolve things like our salt and our sugar, and then it just soaks in a bath just like a marinade. So now for preparation, I'm going to take these out, and because our brine is essentially a salt solution, I'm going to rinse and pat these dry so that way we get a little bit less of the intensity salt, and then we're going to toss it into our pan. So I'm going to add some avocado oil to my cast iron. I like avocado oil because it's got a nice high heat point. So I'm going to let that come to warmth. And with my pork chops now, I'm going to take them over to the sink. I'm going to actively run and rinse with water and then pat them dry with some paper towels. So bear with me here for a second. I personally like to use gloves when I'm handling meat and raw meats. That is just a personal preference. Especially as somebody who likes to have long fingernails, I really don't like the feeling of raw meat underneath my fingers when I'm trying to wash my hands afterwards. All right, so taking our pork chops over to the sink. Step one, I'm going to run some cold water. All right, so even if you're not seeing me on camera right now, I'm essentially dumping my brine, rinsing my pork chops, and we're going to add them to the skillet. They've already been soaking essentially in a marinade. So I am not going to add any extra salt or pepper to my pork chops. So if you're just joining us and you're like, why is she throwing in unseasoned meat into the cast iron? Don't worry, it's already got plenty of infused flavor. All right, a little bit of kitchen safety here. So I've rinsed my pork chops with water. There is hot oil in this pan. I am going to dry them as thoroughly as possible so that we don't get as much backsplash from the oil, because oil and water generally do not mix or play nice together. All right, so I'm just going to grab a dry, fresh pair of gloves. Like I said, just to minimize the amount of water in this process, I'm going to go in with some paper towels and just pat dry as much as I can. Our 2 pork chops, they're going to go in the pan. We did an earlier episode about grilling and cooking with high heat or working with cast iron, and one of the things that we talked about was when we are preparing and cooking these kinds of things, we want to let the heat do most of the work for us. So these pork chops are going to go into the pan. I'm not going to touch them. I'm going to set a timer, and then we will flip and adjust accordingly. All right. So there's my first pork chop. Let me grab the second one. And again, a little bit of off-camera work. I'm just taking paper towels, drying off my pork chop as much as I can. Again, just to reduce the amount of backsplash from the oil and the water. All right, so pork chops are in. I'm going to wash my hands real quick before we come back over. Also going to set a timer for us. These are thick pork chops, so I'm going to do about 7 minutes per side. We'll gauge when we flip them over how much time to do on the other side. All right, quick rinse of the hands. And we can start on our brine, our fresh brine. All right, friends, thank you very much. All right, let's work on our fresh brine. So a brine is a saline solution, and all that means is it's a heavily salted concoction. So the recipe we're using today, we're going to make a garlic and rosemary brine. So very simple. I'm going to take all of my ingredients, add it to the pan. We're going to bring it up to heat just enough so that everything dissolves, and then we're going to let that cool down, add in our pork chops as well. All right, so for today's brine, I'm going to take 3 cups of water. The original recipe has 4 cups of water, and I'm going to explain why I'm reducing it to 1 water when we get to the end of our brine. So into the pot, I'm going to add my 3 cups of water. We're also going to add 1/4 cup of coarse sea salt. If you're like, that sounds like a lot of salt, yes, that is the purpose of the brine, is to really enhance the flavor with salt. 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. 2 sprigs of rosemary. I just walked out to, my rosemary bush still has some herbs on it, so 2 sprigs of rosemary. 2 sprigs of thyme. All right. Maybe 3 sprigs of thyme. All right, a couple of sprigs of thyme. Last few things here that we're going to add. We're going to add in a bay leaf. You can use either cracked or whole peppercorns. I'm going to use whole peppercorns. And about maybe a teaspoon's worth. And last but not least, we can't have our garlic rosemary brine without any garlic. So I'm going to take 2 cloves of garlic. We're going to peel and smash them and add them to our wonderful concoction. So I've got 2 cloves of garlic here. Okay. I'm going to take my chef's knife, using the flat edge of my blade, not the sharp edge of my blade. 2 hands. I'm going to press down and kind of wiggle it in a rotational pattern to help crack the garlic clove and take the peel off a little bit easier. So we want to smash it to just release some of those juices, similar to like cutting up an onion. All right, same thing as I'm going to take my garlic clove, flat side of my knife, kind of wiggle it down, smash it up a bit. There we go. All right, so we've got all of our ingredients added to our brine. I'm going to put this on about medium heat or so. Again, we're just going to warm it up enough so that we can get the salt and the sugar to dissolve. And we've got about 3 minutes left on our pork chops. So I'm going to take a moment here to just rotate the pan. All right, give that a stir. It's probably going to take a couple of minutes for that to warm up and come to temperature. All right, so as I said, our pork chops basically marinated in our brine overnight. So I did prepare a brine last night around 8:30, 9 o'clock. So these have been soaking for about 12 hours. How long you brine is definitely going to depend on the type of cut, as in how thick it is. So obviously, if we're cooking a 20-pound turkey, it's going to need to brine a lot longer than just a pound of pork chops. All right, so what is brining? So brining is a technique that involves soaking meats or fish in a salt and water solution to season, preserve, and improve the texture and flavor of food. This process works by using osmosis. We're going back to some high school biology here. Using osmosis to add moisture and salt to the meat, which helps keep it from drying out and becoming tough when cooked. So that last part is super important, is that because we are adding in more moisture for something that is a little bit leaner, having that moisture in there will help prevent that dryness and that tough texture that people tend to be turned off by when having leaner cuts. So, brining works well with lean proteins like chicken, turkey, pork for today, which do tend to dry out when cooking. All right, our timer is coming down here, so I'm going to flip our pork chop. Alright, so pork chops have been flipped over. My heat's probably a little bit too high. As you can see, I've got some brown and some black here, but it should be fine. We're going to reduce the cooking time on the second side, and we're going to pull those out and let those set. It is super important, by the way, to call out that pork should absolutely be fully cooked. Again, I'm not saying dry it out, but unlike other types of protein where you could probably get away with eating it raw, pork is probably something that you should not consume in an undercooked manner. All right, so brining, coming back to our lovely flavorful mixture over here on the pot. So brining is similar to marination. Most people have done some kind of a marinade in your life, even if you've gone to the store and just bought bottled marinade, you pour it over your chicken or whatever it is that you're seasoning, flavoring, and then you let it soak for a period of time. So marinades use large amounts of acid like vinegar or even citrus juice. So some things like a lot of Mexican dishes like carnitas will use like lime and orange juice as that kind of citric acid in there as well. The length of time for your brine, as I mentioned earlier, is going to depend on the size of your protein being used. Again, coming back to the difference between a whole turkey, that's something you're probably going to need to brine for 24 hours, maybe even 2 or 3 days, depending on how large it is, versus something like a little fish fillet, you could probably brine for about 30 minutes or so, and then it's ready to go. So the technique we're using today is called wet brining. There is also a technique called dry brining. So if you're someone who likes to enjoy a really nice steak or going to a steak house, a lot of times you may see on the menu that they have a dry aged or a dry brined cut of beef on the menu. So dry brining involves covering your entire protein in salt. So very heavy coat, very heavy layer of salt, and you let it rest for several hours. So the salt is going to draw moisture from the interior of the meat to the surface. Then it's going to mix with the salt and then reabsorb with the salt. So essentially you are trapping the moisture within your cut of meat, and that's the brine. That's the wet brine, essentially. All right, I'm going to move this around again. Okay. All right, so quick little update here on our new brine. All right, we are almost there. So the brine, the fresh brine that we're making today, I am not bringing this to a boil. I am raising the temperature only enough that this starts to dissolve more of our solids like our salts and our brown sugar. In fact, this is pretty much good to go. So once this is dissolved, I'm going to turn my heat off. I'm going to remove this from heat. So remember, we're going to add this to my fresh pork chop, my raw cold pork chop. So important to have this cool down a little bit. So remember in the beginning, we added 3 cups of water. So I reduced the amount of water because part of the cool down process I'm going to show you today is that we're going to add some ice to this to cool it down faster. And so we got to account for the volume difference of 3 cups versus 4 cups. So I've got my dish here. I'm going to grab a fresh Ziploc bag. You could also just do container with a lid. All right, so I've got my new Ziploc bag here. If you're someone who always struggles with how do I finagle getting the meat in without touching the sides of the bag, so what you can do is take the edges of your bag and just like your middle school or high school Sophie shorts, you're just going to roll it down enough so that the lower portion of the bag is exposed. So now if it hits these sides, totally fine. We're just going to roll it back up and zip it up. All right, so friends, my timer is getting ready to go off for my pork chops. We're going to pull those from the pan, let those rest for a moment. Remember, even though we're pulling it off the heat, it will continue to cook. Okay. All right, we're going to let all that magic happen. We're done cooking, so we're going to take that off. And let's go ahead and prep our new pork chops. So again, we've got our fresh bag. I'm going to grab a fresh pair of gloves. I am working with boneless pork chops, and these are thick cut pork chops as well. So again, brining time is going to matter based on the size and weight of what it is you are brining. So cooking something that is 1 pound or less, probably not going to take very long. Something that's a pound or more, you can adjust the time. I do want to call out, you don't want to let it brine for too long. I think 12 hours is kind of the sweet spot there. So you can just put it in overnight, pull it out the next day, or vice versa. Just throw it in the morning and pull it out in the evening to cook. All right, pork chops. All right, I got 2 boneless. I guess technically it says they're boneless pork ribeyes, but we're gonna add our pork chops to our bag. All right, friends, 2 brand new pork chops. Same thing, gonna dispose of these gloves, wash my hands. We're gonna add some ice to our brine to both cool it down and add the water that we were lacking in the beginning. Thanks for bearing with me. All right, so if you didn't want to add ice to this, I would like to say I'm just adding it for the purposes of showing on this video. You can always use the full amount. You just want to make sure that you allow your brine to fully and completely cool and come to room temperature, so that way we don't affect the quality of the pork chop while it's going, or while it's doing its thing in the brine. All right, so I'm going to take a handful of ice cubes. There we go. All right, I did about 10 to 12 ice cubes in this mixture. I'm going to give it a stir. There's still plenty of residual heat from where it was on the stove top burner. All right, I'm going to include the recipe for today's episode in the show notes, but honestly, the internet is chock full of brining recipes, so I encourage you to definitely give it a go. There's lots of different flavors and combinations you could use. Okay. All right, friends, we have a new brine. Good. Just a quick finger check to make sure that this is nice and cool. And then our last step here is I'm going to add our brine all together. I'm going to roll the edges of this bag back up. And thankfully we're not sick of pork chops, because I will probably be making these tonight for dinner. We'll probably do some roasted sweet potatoes and maybe a side salad to go along. All right, this wraps up this episode for Friday Morning Fuel. So we made a fresh new brine, and we cooked our rosemary garlic pork chops that were brining last night. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining today's episode. Remember, we're here every Friday, or sorry, excuse me, not every Friday. Ooh, let's back it up. We're here first Friday of every month with Friday Morning Fuel. If there's a particular topic or recipe you would like to see, feel free to mention that in the comments, and we'll see you guys next month for our last episode of 2024.